this is probably a story that no one is paying attention to, and I think it's really important. Japan said that they would be the first Great Reset full adopter, okay? And that made me curious a few months ago when I found that out. I'm like, why? Well, I now know why. They are in serious financial straits. They have been for a while. This is not a new problem. This has been going on, the decline of Japan since the 90s. Well, I read a story, Thursday or Friday, that the Japanese yen has fallen to its lowest level against the dollar in more than 20 years. This means it takes more yen to buy a dollar. As of Friday, the 22nd, it was more than 125 yen to buy a dollar. Normally, only people who are like trading in currencies actually care about this. But the why behind the crash is why you need to care, okay? Because it could very easily lead to the crash of our treasury bonds. And let me explain how a treasury bond. Our debt. We issue treasury bonds every time our government spends money. And we have trillions of these out. And nobody is buying them. Okay, the days of us living high on the hog and, somebody will take this crap. Those days are over. Okay, the Japanese are the largest holder of U.S. Treasury bonds in the world. They hold more than China, more than any European country, more than any other entity except the U.S. Federal Reserve. Why does the U.S. Federal Reserve own so many treasury bonds? They never did that before. They had to start doing it because no one in the world would raise their hand in auction and say, I'll take some of that American crap. Okay? So no one was buying it. So the Fed put trillions of dollars of our debt, and they bought that debt by printing money. Okay? Japan is number 2. Japan holds $2 trillion of our debt. Now, the story that I read on Thursday or Friday was that the prime minister had called Janet Yellen and called the president and said, we need a bailout. You got to help us out. You have to shore up the yen or we are done. Well, we didn't do that. We said we can't do that, and there's a couple of reasons why we can't. So, with them being the largest holder, they're playing a game here. It's a shell game. The whole world is on this shell game. They have $2 trillion in treasuries, and they're forced to sell those bonds to shore up their currency. This would cause our Fed to print more money to put trillions into buying those bonds, which would now be on the market. So inflation could go to 20%. That's the story you'll hear if you pay attention to Bloomberg. But that's just a small part of what's going on. We know that Japan has the worst demographics in the world. It's the oldest population in the developed world. 3.4 retirees over the age of 55 for every one worker under the age of 30. So that one worker is expected to work to support 3.4 people. So nobody's entering the workforce. If you're young, you're not going into the marketplace. The Japanese stopped having kids after the Asian miracle ended in 99 and Japan's economy crashed. Remember the stories where they can't get guys to be even interested in sex? Consider this. Toyota and Honda, the two best-made, best-selling brands in the world, right? Testaments to Japanese ingenuity in manufacturing. Except the Japanese demographics are so upside down, virtually no Hondas or Toyotas are actually made in Japan anymore. More than a decade ago, both companies realized they couldn't find any workers, and that's why they're here in the U.S., Indonesia, and the Philippines. These companies were not alone. In the past 20 years, Japan has lost almost its entire manufacturing base. Does any of this sound familiar? Save a few technology sectors like motherboards and microchips, everything else is not made in Japan. This means their taxable income is gone. And as they move overseas, where labor is available and costs were lower, some of the profits flow home to Japan, but most of the revenue generated stays in countries where manufacturing is occurring. So they had to make up the shortfall. What do? They had a plan. They started selling more and more Japanese bonds to cover their deficits between the massive welfare state and the tax base. So they just started selling bonds. This is where we're at. Japan has the highest personal income taxes in the G7. It also has the highest debt to GDP in the developed world. Our debt to GDP is 130%. That's the highest we've seen since World War II. Japan's debt to GDP is 253%. Okay? That's double ours. So their economy was collapsing. They had to sell bonds. Then they got to the place we are, and they were like, nobody's buying our bonds. So what did they do? Now remember, this just was stated by the Biden administration as something that is coming our way. What they did, so the country wouldn't collapse, they went and they sold Japanese bonds to investors in Japan at 0% interest. Now, why would a company take something where I'm not going to grow on my money and lock my money into a Japanese bond for 10 years? Why would you do that? Because the government mandated it. If you were a retirement fund, you had anything to do with Japan, you were investing, you had to put a percentage into government bonds. So they bought these government bonds, which allowed them to then print more yen. And then what did they do? They took that money and they bought our government bonds, which were returning about 2% interest to them. Now that 2% interest, think of this, that's coming out of your pocket. So we're paying them interest on $2 trillion in treasuries is about $40 billion a year. So we're sending $40 billion, and that's fine. That's a deal where, we're buying turtle tunnels. I mean, we need those things. But Japan's entire defense budget is $47 billion. So we are, in effect, funding 40 billion of their $47 billion in defense. But then we also provide about $10 billion a year in discounts for guns and ammunition and everything else. So we are paying 100% of their military. This isn't by accident, and it's not a bad deal, actually. Our government is more than happy to do that because Japan is the most important strategic defense partner when it comes to containing China or defending Taiwan. We have 55,000 U.S. troops stationed in Japan. Japan is the only foreign country in the world out of which the U.S. has permanently operated a U.S. carrier battle group. So, back to the yen being in free fall. To keep their bonds at 0% and then make that arbitrage thing work, Japan has to continue to buy its own bonds. But that's through quantitative easing, printing. So they print more yen to buy their bonds. And anytime the yield goes above zero, they're in trouble. They're creating artificial demand for their bonds. When the yield on the Japanese government bonds went to 1%, 2%, our 10-year bonds would not be able to service that debt. So our bonds, they no longer have the $40 billion for their military, et cetera, et cetera. They have a debt of 253%. It would cost them to pay interest on their debt more than they ever collect in taxes. So to pay the debt, they have to print currency, buy the bonds, buy ours, and we buy theirs, and it just starts all over again because we have to print money, they have to print money, and so it goes into this inflation death spiral, and that's where they are right now. They're at the beginning of the inflation death spiral. So here's the problem with all of this. If they collapse, I mean really collapse, who can bail them out? We can't. We're close to a death spiral. So who bails them out? And what happens when next September President Xi goes in front of his, People's Congress and says, okay, everybody vote. I am dictator for life. When that happens, and if Japan is out, we are so weak with everything else that is going on. Do you think we're going to save Taiwan? How would we even do that? How would the West protect Australia? By the way, all of this is happening because the Fed said, and the Treasury said, we can't bail you out. But what you probably don't know that we reported on about 3 months ago, the Fed did bail the Bank of Japan out. The Fed gave them $7 trillion. That was in Q3 and Q4 of last year. We're in Q2. $7 trillion they've burned through already. Prepare for impact. Prepare for impact because it is happening. The reason why they said they'd be number one on the boat for the Great Reset is because if we say jump, they are forced to say how high. But we no longer have enough juice to tell anyone to jump because we need all of that juice ourselves.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to our channel so you'll be sure to see similar videos from Blaze TV with the added bonus of signaling YouTube that your voice and opinion still matters. And if you're looking for more great conservative content, check out one of the 2 videos suggested here.